Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Fuller. I'm the Senior Vice President at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. We're super excited that you're all here today to join us for an important conversation. I'm going to wait about 30 seconds for some other folks to go ahead and fill in from the waiting room, and we'll get started. Happy Friday Eve, everybody, as we get ready to come up on basically the beginning of summer, even though the weather in Ohio doesn't exactly feel like that right now. But as we're approaching Memorial Day weekend, we're certainly happy that you guys have all chosen to spend time with us this morning, especially for an incredibly important topic like going through change management. And we have with us today our partners with Ahola, Lori Geiger and Dennis Lee, to share more about what are some of the best practices and ways that businesses can navigate through change, because it's inevitable, it's happening all the time. And there are opportunities and risk there, but we want to make sure that we're leading our organizations the right way. As always with these conversations, we'll have time at the end. We'll try to save some time at the end for questions, but during the conversation presentation, please feel free to populate the chat room, and we'll be monitoring that so we can come back to those questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends Lori and Dennis to kick us off.
All right. We can go to the legal disclaimer. That's the slide everyone loves to see. Yeah, this is the exciting part. The legal disclaimer. This is effectively saying, we're not lawyers, so don't take any of this as legal information. If you would like to, you can access this later, read it over dinner. I'm sure you will. And that's our legal disclaimer. Lori, any need for me to read this slide word for word?
I think as long as we're sending this out, we are good to go.
All right, perfect. Let's go to the next one. All right. So, I see a lot of the names coming in here, and it's exciting and great. We have Ahola clients who have joined us on this. We are with Ahola. I'm an HCM consultant. Lori is one of our proactive HR consultants. Great company. We're the oldest family-owned payroll company in the United States. We're headquartered in Ohio. I'm here in Westerville. Lori's up in our headquarters in Brecksville, Ohio, which is just south of Cleveland. This isn't a sales pitch for us. This is information for you, but we provide anything and everything. So if you have payroll needs, reach out. All right, next slide. All right, so I'll pause here for a moment so that you can look at our faces. I'm going to open things up, then I'm going to turn things over to Lori, as she's more the expert on this. But a little exercise that I liked for us. So I made a little trivia for everybody that you can answer on your own. Right now, there's no cash prize, just for fun. But I want you to consider the best selling nonfiction books over the last 50 or 100 years. And I want you to consider what two genres of those nonfiction books have sold more copies than all others combined. So you're looking at like what kinds of personal development nonfiction books. You probably got them. One is How to Lose Weight, diet books. The other is How to Get Rich. So those two combined have sold more than all other genres of nonfiction books combined. And I also have absolutely no idea if that statistic is true. I just made it up because it's really convenient for my presentation right now. But it certainly seems like it's something that would be true. And it probably is. I don't know. But the broader point is that when that reader picks up the book, they have the goal in mind. They know what they want to accomplish. They want to achieve greater wealth, or, they want to be in better physical shape, better health. But what they're buying in that book, what they're buying is a plan. They're buying a framework. So, today we're not talking about, how I'm not selling you a seminar on how to get rich quick or how to lose weight. We're talking about change management in your business. But really, from a wider lens, it's kind of one and the same. Change management is having a plan to take your organization from here to where you want to be. And it's also kind of a protection to have in place because, as we all know, we can plan all we want. The unforeseen happens. economic factors, health factors inside your company, personnel changes, things happen. But those frameworks and those changes for change management, by having that plan in place, you're setting your business up, your organization, your nonprofit for a more healthy future and the future that you're wanting. So Lori is going to introduce you, or maybe reintroduce you, to some models for change management that you can apply to your business, your organization. And the goal of today is to either introduce you or remind you of these frameworks so that you can incorporate some of these things into your daily practice in your organization. All right. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Lori.
Great. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So like we've been telling you, today's going to be all about change and change management. And I like to share a line that somebody that I used to work for that I really respected said to me one day, and it really got me thinking. And I repeat it to anybody who will listen, in both my professional and my personal life. But that simple sentence was, the only constant is change. And when you think about it, everything in your life, that's the only thing that's going to be constant, is that it's always going to be different, whether it's at work or it's something personal. And everybody has been involved with some type of change, especially at work, whether we were the person at the top and we are initiating the change and we had to control that, or whether we were quote unquote at the bottom and things were rolling down and we were the ones that said who, what, when, where, why. And I don't like this. So change can be very chaotic, but it can also be controlled as well. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about controlling it through a structured approach so that productivity and morale stays high. There's a smooth transition through everything. And you guys don't miss a beat as an organization. There's always bumps in the road. We all know that, but we just need to minimize the potholes, I like to say. Can we go ahead and go to the next slide, please? Okay, now why change management matters. So like I already said, it ensures a smooth transition through the whole process. And as we all know, it's not a short process, it's a long process with many, many steps, and short-term and long-term goals. So this is something that we really need to plan for. We need to have a lot of insight as whether we're HR managers or we are small business owners, office managers, whoever is involved at that higher level. We all need to be prepared so that we can increase success rates. Again, productivity and morale are huge. And as you know, if you have happy employees, they're going to produce better for you and be more productive. And if you have those two things, the rest is pretty easy. Not totally easy, but pretty easy compared to those two things, because happy employees and productivity make a company go round, truly. Can you go ahead to the next slide, please? Whoop, back one, please. There we go. Thank you so much. So there's a few different types of organizational change, right? And I'm sure that some of us have been involved in at least one of these, if not all of these. A shift in business goals or mission, that's a really common one. Through the evolution of a business, something might change. We've grown into a new mission, or we've grown into a different set of values, or we've added on values. So that's just the natural evolution of a business, just growing, and that usually comes with more mature businesses, right? And then we have the structural changes. So the change in hierarchy or reporting relationships. And there can be a number of reasons for that, right? It could be because the company is really growing and there's the need for that, or it could be that the company is downsizing. Could just be a complete restructure that now a different director is going to be looking over this department for a different reason. Maybe somebody left the company, maybe they added somebody in, so they're spreading out duties. So lots of different reasons why a company restructures, but definitely a type of change that affects everybody in the organization. Technological, we all know technology is just at the speed of lightning. I like to think of Star Wars and like that hyperspeed. That's how I think about technology changes. I love that my kids have to teach me half of the things, but so we're always doing that in our personal lives and at work, right? Whether it's something small or whether it's a complete overhaul of a system and moving to a completely different system, there's definitely going to be some concern. There's definitely going to be bumps, and there's definitely going to be a learning curve. So very, very important type of change for people. And then people-centric, kind of related to structural if you're getting a new boss, but just a change in leadership or the culture of the company. Some companies don't have a great culture and they really want to build that in an effort to build that. They're going to make some positive changes and positive in the way of what are your employees looking for. So sometimes these things hold each other's hand and there's more than one at a time. And like I said, sometimes it's just one of these things, and you next year you might have another one. We go back to that. There's always things changing. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the change curve. So the change curve is really about individual, I'm sorry, about emotional responses from your staff. There's always going to be some people who are scared. There's always going to be some people who have apprehension, right? So it's really about kind of an emotional journey, if you will, of those employees. Obviously, we have denial, resistance, acceptance, and exploration up here. Things like shock, that's usually the first thing. People will say, oh my gosh, it's, water cooler talk. Can you believe that we're doing this and this and this? What are they thinking? Or I'm so excited, or anywhere in between. The denial is huge. It won't affect me. This is somebody else's problem. This isn't going to bother me at all. Kind of like the ostrich sticking its head in the sand. Really, really an emotional response. I know that we probably all have gone through that at some point, and it's just such a very, very powerful, strong emotion that as leaders we really need to be focused on that as well. You'll have frustration and anger from employees, maybe frustrated because this is just another change and another thing that they have to do in their day. Maybe they're angry because it really affects their department the most and they're going to have everything kind of shaken up, and they're going to have to learn new things and do new things, and they're just not happy about it, which is also such a powerful emotion. So we really need to focus on that as well. Some employees become depressed and just demotivated, which is the last thing that you want to do. You don't want them to be unengaged. You don't want them possibly looking for another job, thinking that maybe the grass is greener on the other side. You really want to keep that morale up, and if somebody is depressed about it, figure out why. Tell me a little bit more about that to reassure, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And then there's always acceptance and integration. So after a while, we all say, all right, this is happening, whether I like it or not. I get it. I just have to kind of suck it up and go through this change. So as leaders, it's our job to get our employees to that point. And then the integration is it's the new norm, right? And then we can talk next year about, oh my gosh, do you remember when we were all freaking out about this change? Look at how far we've come. Look at all the positivity that's come from it. So all very valid emotions that leaders need to keep in mind that different employees may be going through, and probably at different times, and maybe even ping-ponging back and forth between them. So we really need to get a handle on that. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so Dennis mentioned that there are a few different models in change management, and the EDCAR model really focuses on individual change. So in order for big changes to happen, lots of little individual changes need to happen, right? So that's what, as leaders, we need to focus on too. We need to focus on every employee in everything that they are going through, every thought, every comment, every fear. A lot of the issues that employees have are kind of self-centered. I completely understand that though, because we all in the beginning think, well, what's in it for me? as an employee, not the greater picture. Completely normal. And it's something that if we realize as leaders, it happens, it's easier to deal with that, because you're never going to get anybody saying, oh, great, you're making all these changes. Can't wait. Just let me know how it goes. Happy to help out. Everybody's always going to have those questions. Again, what's in it for me? You know, why do I have to do this? Do I have to learn something new? Do I have to do something new? Am I going to be successful in it? Is it beyond my, is it technology? Maybe I can't grasp it. Is it going to just move too fast for me? And how am I going to maintain it? How's the company going to maintain it? So there's a lot of this kind of self-reflecting questions that employees are having. And it's really important for us as leaders, like I said, to just be aware that the employees are having these concerns, and then using some tools and tricks of the trade, so to say, to squash some of those fears and to move through the whole process as seamless as possible. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so steps in management process, or steps in the change of management process. As you know, we're leaders, so we always have to think, what is the change? Why are we making this change? What is our message going to be to our employees and to our stakeholders? So coming up with a clear definition of the change, and knowing the answers, or knowing the questions, anticipating the questions that people are going to ask, so that you know the answer and can give complete, clear, transparent, honest answers is really, really important when you are trying to put together any sort of change, small or big. And it's really important at this stage of the game to assess the impact that it's going to have on, again, employees, stakeholders, even yourself as a leader. We aren't protected from it. It's always something that we are going to have to deal with as well. And every company is different. Every set of employees is different. So the impact is going to be different, right? So you really have to think, okay, let me really think about my stakeholders and my employees, and how are they going to accept change? What is their frame of mind? Have they been asking for something? Are they going to be excited? Have they been dreading this because there's been murmurs around the office around it? So really sitting back and thinking, what can go wrong? And if that happens, what are we going to do about it? And then developing a communication plan. So important. You never want a game of telephone. I don't know if I'm just old and that's what I call it, but you never want just the rumor mill to go out of control. You want to make sure that somebody in leadership, either the owner, a CEO, a president, somebody in a high position, communicates the change with employees, and is very transparent. I understand that sometimes we can't tell employees everything, and that's okay. But what I mean by transparency is just walk them through the steps, give them the plan on what's going to happen, how it's going to affect them, possibly negatively, at least in the short term, and then how it's going to end up making the company and their lives as an employee better. And that communication just has to happen, has to be two-way communication throughout the whole process and even after the process is done. Training and support. How many times have we heard, well, they made all these changes and when I went to one training class for one day and I can't remember everything that they taught me in one day. The ongoing support and the ongoing training is so important, because we can only absorb so much at one time, and especially if the employees are going through all these fears and all these concerns, training is going to be one of the last things on their mind, possibly. So we want to make sure that we always have a solid training plan. We always offer support. We're always checking in. How are you doing? What questions do you have? What additional training can we provide you? What can we expand on? And then you kind of, I don't want to say sit back because you still have to be involved, but you kind of have to sit back and observe and monitor how things are going. A lot of that is just, kind of keeping quiet and keeping your ears open, being observant. call it like being a teacher or a parent. You just kind of sit there and listen to the kids, and you gauge their emotions and everything else just by being a quiet observer. And then reinforcing the change in the end. You really want to kind of close that loop at the end before any long-term goals are assessed. If we
Lori,
could
I'll
go,
talk to that for a second so
yeah,
you can
please,
take a drink of water real
please,
quick.
yeah.
And one thing comes to mind, reinforcing the change. I'm thinking back, so I used to be a teacher, right? And the same thing happened every year. And, as a younger teacher, I picked up on this from the older teachers. It was August, we'd come in, new initiative. All right. And administration, they're selling it hard. We're doing this year. We're going to stick to it. We're actually going to follow through. And then you look at all the eye rolls of the older teachers, you start seeing text messages, people picking up their phones, and it's all just sarcasm of like, all right, this will be gone by October. And the problem was they were right. I stayed in teaching for 8 years, and I started turning into that teacher by about year 4. They would tell us we're taking on this big new initiative. It's going to change the world. Kids are going to have these outrageous, things because they went to a seminar over the summer, got excited about it, brought it back to the school. That's great, but they never reinforced the change. The steps in the change management process mean very little if you don't come back to that. And even, in the business world that I've been in for a while now, I still see some of that. It's a lot better than it was in public education. But if you don't put it into place if you're not planning on reinforcing it in the future, otherwise it will go away and the value of that change will be lost. At least from the experiences I've had. All right, back to you, Laura.
Yeah, and then to build off of that too, then the next initiative that you have that you may truly want to follow through with, everybody's going to eye roll, like Dennis said, and everybody's going to be texting like, yeah, whatever, I'm not even paying attention because we all know this isn't going to happen. So, not only important for that initiative, but for all your future initiatives and just for the trust. We don't want to be that boss that talks out of one side of the mouth and does something else. So, thank you, Dennis. Very, very good example. If you can go to the next slide, please. Common barriers to change. I'm sure that we all know these. There are a lot of them, more than these bullet points here on this page. I mean, sometimes it just depends on the person as well. Some people may have more barriers up. One of the biggest barriers, though, is to go back to communication. The more that employees know and understand the who, what, when, where, why of what's going on, the better they'll feel. They'll feel that they understand things, they know what to expect. There's not going to be any surprises, and they're a little bit calmer about that change. So, communication, and again, I said it before, both ways is very important, not just talking at our employees, but talking with them and having them give us feedback. Again, we'll get into that a little bit later, but the two-way street, super, super important. You never want to stand up there and say we're going to do this and kind of turn around and walk off stage. You really need to interact through the whole process from day one through the end and beyond. We could have fantastic ideas. If we don't have top leadership support, it's going to go down the tubes no matter what we want to do as leaders. Those leaders are in those positions for a reason. And if they don't buy into the idea and the change, nobody underneath them is going to. There's just going to be morale's going to be down. Everybody's going to have that eye roll attitude that we are kind of talking about. When we put changes in place, we really have to make sure that we have the right resources to do that. I know that I've personally been involved in as an employee in the past. And I think, why did they do this? It's a great idea, but we don't have everything that we need to do it. It's just we're missing that piece of the puzzle. So we have to make sure that from the get-go, before we let our ideas out of the gates, that we have all our resources in place and that we're anticipating what else we might need too if something unexpectedly pops up. Planning. This super, super important. You can't just go to, like Dennis said, a seminar in the summer and think, awesome, cool, we're going to go ahead and implement this. have to think long and hard about it. Kind of going back to um, part of the earlier slides, you really have to mull things over, and you really have to think about the whole big picture and all the little pieces parts in between. I know sometimes I get super excited about things, and before they come out of my mouth, I try to say, okay, let me step back and let me see how this is really going to work, and if it can work, before I say anything. Um, Culture's also a huge thing. Depending on what kind of culture you have at your company, changes may be more readily accepted, because everybody already feels like a team, and they're like, all right, that's fine. I know someone's got my back. If there's a poor culture and a lot of disconnect between employees, they're going to feel like they're on an island, and there's going to be more of a resistance because they may feel that they don't have that support. As much as they may hear, we support you, we support you, if they don't feel it every day from leadership or their coworkers, it's going to be a struggle for them and for us as leaders. And then training, we talked about the amount of training. We also have to focus on the quality of training, right? Everybody learns in a different way. We have to make sure that we understand that. We have to make sure that we're thorough. We have to make sure that our employees don't assume, we can't assume that they know certain things and just say, well, this is all you really need to know. This is what we're going to train on. You should understand the rest. We always need to think, you know what? I'm going to pretend that they have no idea what I'm talking about, and we're going to start from the very beginning, and we're going to go to the very end in training. Whether or not they've dealt with this at another company or they've known the system before or whatnot, we want to start fresh and we want to be as complete as possible. Inadequate training, that's super, super important. I know I just kind of, talked about it, but that to me is one of the huge things that us as leaders need to focus on, because if we don't have that, we're not getting anywhere. We're getting there fast. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the role of leadership and how they're in that position for a reason, right? And what they have to do and the example they have to set. So some key leadership roles when you're making changes, that leader has to have a vision and a strategy. They have to be able to communicate that vision and that strategy with their employees. And they have to be consistent about it. They can't change stories, they can't change support levels. They have to be in it to win it and offer that same level of support throughout the whole process. In this day and age, we're always talking about influencers, right? So I know it's not Instagram or Facebook or anything, but those influencers, they know what they're doing, right? And they know how to deliver their message, and they know how to get people to latch on to whatever they're selling or they're doing. And that's what leaders need to do. Need to think about, who is my audience and how am I going to capture them and how am I going to have them buy into what I want to happen. And communication is a huge part of that. Leading by example, that's something else. I feel like, Dennis was a teacher. As teachers, parents, leaders, HR representatives, whatever the case may be, we have to be leading by example. We can't say, do this and not do it ourselves, because the confidence and the validity of what we're saying, it's not going to be there. Employees lose confidence very quickly, and they can see through somebody if they're not following through with their own rules. So super important. And I know sometimes leaders think, well, they're not going to notice. They're kind of absorbed in their own little world. They notice everything. Employees notice every little thing, and no more than we give them credit for. So super important as well. And then we want to empower our teams, and we want to support them. We want to say, you can do this, and we are here if you slip and something happens and you fail. We're going to get you there. And we're going to empower our teams to make decisions, right? The more decisions they feel that they can make, the more confident that they're going to be in the change, the more freedom they'll feel like they have. They won't feel like they're micromanaged, and they'll feel that, you know what, I can do this. I feel better about this now. So super, super important roles of your top leadership team. And it may be one person, it may be 10 people, but it's important that everybody is on the same page.
Well, if I could, I want to speak to
Yeah,
one thing.
yeah, please.
Um, because I talk with, I talk with a lot of business leaders, HR leaders, and what I do. And in organizations that have a hierarchy, have, the owner, some form of middle management as it goes down. On step one and step three here, setting the vision and the direction, for you top leaders out there, you have to get buy-in from the chain of command on down, because that, whatever vision you're setting is being facilitated through them. And if you have middle managers that are kind of, talking out of the side of their mouth to their employees, like, yeah, they have this idea, but, we'll see how long this lasts, or we'll see if this actually works. Those lower level employees, then they don't have the vision that top management thinks they've set. They're going off what their direct manager is telling them. So if you're going to set that vision, if you're going to put a new initiative in place, get buy-in on down the line from those managers that oversee anybody, and your initiative is going to go a lot better. That's something that can really curb you. All right, go ahead.
Perfect. If you could go to the next slide, please. All right, I promised you in the beginning of this that we would talk about some tools and techniques. And I feel like some of these we've already kind of covered, but they're important. So that's why we're bringing them up again. But stakeholder analysis, we need to make sure that we really analyze what are our clients going to think, or our customers going to think, what are our stakeholders going to think. Stakeholders are employees too. So you really need to kind of get into their minds and think, how are they going to think of this? That helps us anticipate what questions they may have. That helps us anticipate what comments, complaints might be coming our way. So really sitting there and reflecting on how this is going to affect the stakeholders is really a huge deal. We already talked about the impact of assessing. You always want to assess in the beginning and throughout, how is it going. So I won't spend too much time on that. And then communication, to beat a dead horse, it's super important. And it's just something that we always have to keep in mind. And it's one of those words as a HR individual that I just want to tattoo on my forehead. I want to tattoo documentation and communication up there, because they're so important. Feedback is huge related to communication, right? But feedback can come back to leadership in many forms. It can be a survey, it can be one-on-ones, it can be a town hall group discussion where there's questions and answers going on. What's really important to remember is, if we're asking for the feedback from our employees, do something with it, and don't ignore it. It needs to be acknowledged and answered. Even if it's something that an employee is saying, hey, why don't you do this? And it's something that's just not feasible, don't ignore it. Make sure that you acknowledge it, and maybe you go into the reasons of why it would work or why it wouldn't work, and thank them for their thoughts. And truly, their feedback is important, because they are part of this company, and without those employees, we're not much, are we? We really need the employees to be happy and buy into everything that we are doing as a company in order to be successful. They're a huge piece of the puzzle, humongous. And again, going back to training programs, I won't dwell on this much longer either. But again, have multiple in place if necessary, and really make sure that you're choosing the right one for your employees. Coaching and mentoring is huge. So like Dennis said, lead by example, but beyond leading by example, coaching and mentoring, that's an ongoing process, right? So nobody should ever come into the boss's office and hear you haven't been doing this right and you haven't been keeping up with the other employees, or whatever the case may be. They should be getting ongoing coaching, whether it's from the top or whether it's from a manager that is in their day to day. Those little spot coaching sessions go a real long way. And I know myself personally, that's when I learn the best. I'm not reading from a screen, I'm not listening to a spiel in a room of 100 people. I'm getting individual attention and I'm getting real time feedback. So I think that that's just so important that we do that with our employees, not only just all the time, but especially during times of change when all these emotions are heightened and all these changes are, really at the forefront of everybody's mind. And mentoring, some employees just want to mentor and say, can I have some regular time scheduled with somebody so I can run ideas and questions past them? I think that that's great. It doesn't show weakness in my eyes. It shows that they're truly invested in understanding their role in the change, and they want to grow and they want to learn. So anytime an employee asks for a mentor, I always highly suggest figuring something out for them. Some might be easier than others, but always trying to come up with a plan for them. Super important. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right. So measuring success. There's different ways of measuring success. One is going to be your adoption rate, right? So you're going to be able to see how many people are using the new system, or how many people are doing X, Y, and Z, whatever your change involves. Super important there. And it's going to be gradual, right? Not everybody's going to be on the same level playing field. So employees are going to adapt and adopt to change at different rates, and we need to keep that in mind and not compare them to each other, but just make sure that we're encouraging everybody through the process. We already talked about employee feedback, performance metrics. So super important here too. You want to kind of have a baseline, see where you started, and see where things are going. Are they going gradually getting better, better, better? Are there some bumps in the road? Do we have kind of like one of these charts where there's good days and there's bad days? Are there more good days than there are bad days? And how can we make sure that we are having a good return on investment? That's one of the ways, right? We look at the performance because that's going to directly impact our return on investment. And then I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's what we really want to look at. At the end of the day, we want to see, are we, whatever the goal is, are we making more money? Are we more efficient? Are our customers happier? Are our employees happier? Whatever the case may be, you really, really want to look at that. And that's something that just doesn't end. That's something that constantly needs to be monitored and looked at. So it's not just an easy, okay, this is going to be from January to December initiative, and then we're done and we can go on to the next thing. It's going to take constant effort to keep a positive change going like that. And if you can go to the next slide, please. I wanted to go through a couple case studies, and if you have anything to add through any of these, Dennis, please feel free. I'm sure that everybody on this call or watching the recording can come up with tons of examples that they've been involved in one way or another. But a few things that are really big and really common themes right now are what I want to focus on. I know of a company who's been letting employees work remotely since the pandemic, 100%. And now they're requiring more of a hybrid role, and they're requiring those employees to come into the office, not 5 days a week, but 2 to 3 days per week, just depending on their role and what projects may be going on at that time. So as you can imagine, and maybe some of you on this call are directly impacted by it, it's never popular. Every now and then someone's like, yes, I love going into the office and getting dressed up every day. So right out the gate, you know that this company had a struggle trying to get everybody to change their lifestyle because they've gotten used to a different lifestyle over the past 5 years. So some key strategies that we instructed them to kind of consider and highly recommend that they use is, of course, the communication, um, the who's, what's, when, where, why, explaining how it's going to benefit the employee. I know that they weren't thinking that it was going to benefit them at all, but there are truly some benefits. So pointing out more of the positive than the negative really helps. Gathering employee feedback. Of course, they heard, this is dumb, we don't want to do this. Why do we have to do this? I'm productive at home. So just listening to the feedback, not only their comments, but their concerns. Um, that was a very, very important step in some of the decisions that this company made, to make sure that, by and large, most people were happy, from management that wanted employees in the office to those employees who had to make that life adjustment. Um, and they had to assess the risk of losing employees. I read all these studies all the time that, or surveys that say, X percent of employees say that they would leave if their employer made them work in the office 5 days a week. Or I'm sure that you've seen something similar. So they really had to sit down and assess, what are we at risk of losing when we roll this initiative out? So kind of already alluded to it, but they really had the challenge, the pushback of, these employees have changed their lifestyle. They have revolved their family life around being able to work from home and not commute. Maybe being able to be a little bit more flexible. Maybe being able to log on earlier and log off earlier, or log on later and work until 10 o'clock at night if that's what worked for them. So there was a lot of that going on, that the company and leadership really had to work through. In the end, the hybrid schedule, it was something that was offered to the employees in the beginning of the initiative, but listening to employee feedback, they asked, what kind of hybrid schedule do you think that you would like? Do you want set days at home? Do you want a flexible schedule? Are there certain days of the week that you guys would really like? So getting that feedback from employees, I think, went a really long way in them accepting the change, because they felt they had some control. And I think that that's important. I understand that a lot of leaders don't want to let that go to employees, that control. But at the end of the day, if them choosing their work from home day makes them truly happy and it's not going to affect business, um, it's fine to give them that control, right? Um, Majority adjusted well. It was a bumpy transition in the beginning, then it smoothed out, and then, kind of like we talked about before, it's just the new norm now. And there's really no backlash. They didn't lose any employees. It was handled well, so that's what I attribute that to. And if we could go on, I just want to do at least one more case study before we open up for questions. Huge thing that I'm seeing with a lot of clients, and I'm hearing from colleagues, nonprofits losing a lot of major funding. And without funding, we all know that the first thing that's going to go are those employees that we can cut where we can. Everybody is essential, but at the end of the day, if we only have so much money as an organization, what are we going to do, right? So their initial concern was, who am I cutting? What role do they play? Where can I shift this work to? Is it going to overwork somebody else? So that really took a while to assess. And again, puzzle pieces, moving things around. If this person could absorb this, if this person could absorb this. And that really helped to make the decision of who is going to retain a position at the company, or the organization, and who is going to have to be laid off, unfortunately. And one of the big things with layoffs is, these employees, just like I'm sure in any company, myself, I would think the same thing. If I'm one of the people who gets to stay, my morale is kind of in the dump. Um, it, I've lost work friends. I've absorbed more work. Should I start looking for a new job? Those are all questions that the company heard or the organization heard, whether it was through the grapevine or directly from these employees that were left. And I would say the most common one was, what's going to happen to me? Um, the more work, they're happy if they could stay with the company. So although they weren't happy about it, and it kind of got them down, at the end of the day, they just wanted to make sure that they were going to have a job. And if somebody has that on their mind, they're definitely not going to be as productive as we need them to be. So I really encourage that client to just be very honest, as transparent as they possibly could. I know sometimes there are things again that we can't say, but that communication and listening to the concerns really, really went a long way with their employees. So I think that the leaders there handled it really, really great. I can't think of anything that I would change. Um, and Let's see, do we have time for the last case study or do we want to take questions?
I think we have time for the last case study, Lori.
Okay, perfect. Um, Another one that we see all the time, and I'm sure that we've all been involved in some capacity, and that a lot of my clients are seeing now. Um, Different executives, they come and they go, right? And it's a hard spot to fill because there's a lot of specialty areas that executives have, and it's going to take the right exec for the right company, the right industry, the right group of employees, right? So I've had a number of clients, but this one in particular that I'm thinking of, an executive left and they were bringing a new executive in, and it wasn't somebody that they were promoting from inside. They were bringing out a quote unquote outsider. And they had lots of concerns from their employees about, how is somebody who doesn't know my job now going to be able to tell me what to do and support me in this? So again, it all goes back to communication. The leadership shared what they could. They led by example. That was a huge benefit. And I know that those leaders had some questions and some fears of their own that they kept close to the chest. But they put on the face every day and they were positive. Um, and that went a long way with their employees. The more relaxed they appeared, the more relaxed their employees became. And it ended up, as all change is a little bumpy in the beginning. Everybody's trying to learn everybody's different ways and quirks and how we all work. In the beginning, that happened, it leveled out. Again, it's just a new norm. Some of the employees in the beginning thought, this isn't going to affect me at all. Like, I don't work directly for that executive, but we all know that a change that major is going to affect the whole company. So once everybody was on board, a little bit more relaxed, felt that support from upper management, from leadership. There really was minimal disruption. Like I said, some bumps in the road that are going to happen, but their productivity really didn't go down. They made sure that just that constant reinforcement and support was there, and that's what I attribute just the level production to. Dennis, have you seen some of these with some of your clients or prospects or just
Absolutely,
okay?
1000%. And these are common. I thought these were really good case studies just because they are so common. Um, and kind of my contribution to these, I'll just talk like as an employee, right? I'm not a top exec at Ahola. I'm not. I'm a salesperson. So I'm an employee. And when I read through all three of these, I was thinking like, how would I deal with this the best? I just want to know why. That is the best thing that leadership can tell me. So when it comes to like the work from home policy, justify it. Tell me why you're thinking what you want to think. I don't want to go into the office 5 days a week. I have a million reasons and justifications for why that's not good for me. But if you can explain to me how this is better for our business, if you can explain to me the need, the motivation behind the decision, I'm going to take it better. Same thing with the nonprofit. If I'm one of the remaining people at a nonprofit, I just want to know why those cuts were made. Your employees, they're smart. They can understand things. If the money's not there, they'll understand that the money's not there. Just, explain it to them as much as you can. Obviously, you can't disclose everything to employees. But as much as you can, I think that if you communicate the why behind it, it's going to be received better. And obviously, with this last one, it applies too. So that was what I was thinking the whole time, is the employee perspective and how to, retain that trust in leadership, how to keep your employees, how to keep your employees happy. Like I don't know if I represent the populace at large. I just want to know why, though. And that's the biggest thing you can do for me. That's my contribution.
Thanks, Dennis. That goes back to the what's in it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do we want to open it up to questions or comments?
Absolutely. Kind of watching the chat for now to see what pops in. Do want to remind everyone that yes, thank you for being here, and we will send out the recorded session. But just a couple of things as people are thinking about some potential questions. A few things I took away from today, that even though change is bumpy and we can anticipate some difficulty, it really is an opportunity for us to enhance that communication, as you've said, and our opportunities to collaborate with one another. So, focusing on those, really strong, direct, honest communication opportunities, and then how can we collaborate best? As you walk through the different change curves, I thought they were both the ADKAR model and the Kubler-Ross model really interesting. And again, the Kubler-Ross model coming, from a space of grief, recognizing that that is an original grief model, but that acknowledges that people are grieving something when we're making changes at work. So I love the fact that the Kubler-Ross model was included here too. I thought that was just really spot on. And, looking at change as an opportunity to continue to empower and support our workforce, which I thought, gosh, if we keep that kind of as the North Star, each one of those small changes that lead to the bigger change, I think that just makes for such a better, healthier culture and workplace. So thank you for bringing all those forward.
You're welcome, absolutely. And, just kind of as a final thought before we take a question, for companies that might not have the best culture or the culture that they want, if a change is done the right way and in a thoughtful manner, that in itself can help to get that culture where you want it to be. Everybody feels like they were part of a team and they have a place and they're seen, they're heard, they trust leadership. So sometimes going into change, you think the worst, and at the end, if it's done properly, you might come out better for it, not just because your change that you were focusing on was successful, but because it was a morale booster and in a team building experience, and that culture really grew from it.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing that you shared that sometimes I think we forget about how important it is that when we do solicit that feedback from our teams, and they share, they're vulnerable, they're open, they share how they feel, what they think. If we don't close the loop on that and really respond to it, I've worked not currently, but in past employment opportunities where my opinion was asked, and then nothing really happened as far as an answer. Whether that answer was "Thank you for the response. We can't, move on that at this time. Here's why." Back to what Dennis was sharing, or "Thank you for your input. It appears that lots of people in the organization feel and think the same way. Here's what we're going to do in order to make a change in response." So, just love that reminder again. We can ask for feedback, but we have to be responsive.
Yeah, I always say even worse than not asking for feedback is asking for it and not acknowledging it. So,
Yeah, for
absolutely.
sure. It doesn't look like we have any questions. You guys did such a great job of putting everything forward. But thank you again, both Lori and Dennis, for being here today. It's always a pleasure to work with you and the team at Ahola. And thank you all that jumped on the call today. If you have any further questions, you know how to get in touch with us. We also have provided Dennis and Lori's contact information as well here. So feel free to reach out to them as well. Everyone have a safe and happy holiday weekend, and we'll see you very soon at another chamber event.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.